Transparency allows light to shine through. When we're dense, when we live opaquely, hiding and covering up feelings, thoughts, and actions, we block the truth of who we really are and why we're here. Our own transparency allows our light to shine out, allowing us to see deeper into ourselves and also allowing others to as well. The more we allow transparency of being, the more love and connection we allow to flow through our lives. By trade, today's speaker Spark is a graphic, web, and product designer. And it is his work that recently, I guess it's over a year ago, that's recent.
Yes.
Recently transformed the Circle of Miracles website, the new banner and the pictures that are there. He also has a collection of artwork and photography featuring his original digital art series, Photospin and Photostreak. Our speaker is a writer of nonfiction and what he terms metafictional novels. He began his spiritual journey at the age of 30, and he says, quote, "Let's be honest, it was because of a woman." End quote. There are no coincidences.
I learned that one real quick.
All his life he has been curious about physics, ghosts, psychics, the mystical, and it wasn't until he was shown a new way that everything began to change. A new world of possibilities and understanding opened up, sparkling him to live a happier, more loving life and inspiring others to do so. He is trained in EFT, IET, and Reiki. He has a passion for positive change in the world, always wanting to bring out the best in the people he meets, and believes in a higher calling to facilitate world peace, one step at a time. His latest calling and endeavor was heard clearly in October of 2012 to create Awaken, a center for human evolution. Today's speaker is no stranger to Circle, although today is his first formal presentation. Please help me welcome Greg Campisi.
Thank you very much.
Oh, don't want to welcome anybody.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see you here on this lovely Sunday morning. So, the title of the talk, Crystal Being, Living Life in Transparency, that came to me, like most of the talks that I do and the things that I do, when I actually take the time to stop and pay attention, it just comes to me. So the first part came to me first, Crystal Being. And I knew what I was going to be talking about was about expressing ourselves and being more transparent in our life and with our feelings and emotions and words. But Crystal Being, I thought, well, if that's the only title, people are going to think we're talking about aliens or angels or crystal beings living inside the earth or something like that. So I needed to be clearer. So I added my little tagline, living life transparently. So Crystal Being, they go together, and I want to talk a little bit about just what those words mean to me, because when we think about crystals, there's a lot of words that we use that correlate with the idea of being clear and being crystal. And even, going way back when we had people over for dinner and things like that, you'd bring out the good crystal. And those were the good glasses that were high quality and were clear. Another common expression is crystal clear. When you're talking to somebody, when you're trying to express the meaning, you need to be crystal clear. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, crystal clear. And even that expression has a little bit of a dual meaning because it's about clear understanding, but you also say, I hear you crystal clear. I hear you loud and clear. So there's also just that clarity with the word crystal. So we have this clearness, and this quality of being crystal, this understanding of being crystal. And for me, it even goes beyond that, because for me, when I talk about a crystal, I think also of facets and sides. And there's a lot of talk about how, in a lot of ways, we are a crystal. We have a crystal inside us. We're moving towards becoming more crystal. We're becoming crystal beings. So it's about that clarity. It's about that understanding. It's about that transparency. But to me, it's also about the many facets. And it all relates. It all correlates. Because for me, and for other people that I see, we all have a lot of different sides. And all those sides are part of us. It's all part of that same whole. It's part of that same crystal. But there's different sides. And in a lot of ways, we only show one side at a time. If we're angry, we're showing that anger. It's a little difficult to be angry at someone and be happy and smiling at the same time. It usually doesn't happen. It's one or the other, because those are different sides. But it's still the same part. It's still all part of the whole. It's a different side of the whole. So part also of being crystal clear is allowing all those sides to be seen, because we tend to hide them even from ourselves. If we see ourselves as a crystal and we see ourselves as clear, then we allow ourselves to know the different sides of ourselves. But a lot of times we don't want to see all the different sides of ourselves. We don't want to see them all at once. And a lot of those sides we try to pretend don't even exist. So the crystal inside of us, the multifaceted being that we are, is a little cloudy, it's a little dense, it's a little dark, and we seem to like to keep it that way because we feel safer that way. Because if we can't see all of ourselves, no one else can see all of ourselves. At least that's what we tell ourselves. But it's not always true. Usually we're only fooling ourselves. Yeah. So, but what I've noticed and what I'm coming into being is this life of transparency, and this life of seeing all the different sides of myself, accepting all the different sides of myself, and not trying to hide those different sides, those uglier sides. Because what happens is the parts of ourselves that we don't want to see, again, we're only fooling ourselves. They're there. They're always there. And we actually end up blocking our energy and blocking our life force and blocking the joy of our soul when we stop ourselves from expressing certain sides of ourselves. And the more we try to hide them, the more we actually create blockages, energy blockages in ourselves, create density, and create more emotional turmoil. To really live free and peaceful and clear, we have to start stepping up, being brave enough and courageous enough to allow all those different sides of us to be seen. And this goes back to the transparency. When you have a crystal, and it's such a good example of the crystal, because a physical crystal, has all these different sides, and if it's clear, you can see through. Even though you're looking at the front side, you can see the back side, even though the front side is facing you. And if we allow ourselves to be seen through and through, and we don't hide anything anymore, we are actually allowing ourselves to live our fullest life, our fullest being. And it's actually in that moment that we allow ourselves to be the fullest we can be and the most we can be. And it's actually the safest we can be. A lot of times we think we have to hide parts of ourselves and hide sides of ourselves to be safe. And it's actually quite the opposite that's happening. Because the outside world, well, kind of two things happen in my eyes. I think the more we try to hide something, the more the universe says, it's still there. You're only fooling yourself, and it actually takes steps to draw it out. And the more you try to hide it, it seems like the more the world sees it and tries to bring it back to the front, and that's actually when it becomes painful, because if we don't want to see it in ourselves, we're going to fight and we're going to resist, and it just makes things that much harder and that much more difficult and that much more awkward. And it's all these emotions of shame and guilt that we attach to hiding things that actually cause the most problems and turmoil in our life. When we are clear about who we are, when we're not afraid of who we are and afraid of those sides of ourselves that are behind us that we try to hide, when we let it all shine, when we let it all be seen, we are vulnerable, and yet there is a lot of strength and beauty in that vulnerability, because no one can use that against us if we put it out there. Think about some of the things that you don't like about yourself or you're kind of ashamed of. And it can be anything. It can be in a past event. It can be an emotion. It can be, even within groups. Maybe you're ashamed of a certain friend. Maybe you're ashamed of a parent. Maybe you're ashamed of a child. And it's those feelings that create the turmoil in the world and in all these facets of ourselves and the facets of our community. When we allow ourselves to see who we really are, we also allow everyone else to see who we really are. And it's when, well, let me step back too, because even for me, for most of my life, I feel like I know I've been very honest, but that's different from being very open. And there's a very important difference there, because it doesn't matter how honest you are, you can choose just not to say something or not to admit to something, and you're still being honest. There's no lies being told, but you're just not admitting to certain things. And again, it goes back to those feelings of guilt and shame and all that kind of stuff. And we get a lot of that growing up. And it's the way that there was, I had a conversation recently, and we were talking about how a lot of the way the world was, and especially coming from the generations that came through the Great Depression and things like that, there was a lot of fear in the world, and a lot of us were raised with a lot of fear, with a lot of protection. Don't cross the street, don't go too far, be afraid of this, be afraid of that, don't climb the tree, you're going to fall and get hurt and break your leg, don't. There's so many things that, and it's really out of fear, and I know it's out of protection, and we like to tell ourselves that it's out of love, but if there's too much protection going on, it's really coming from fear. It really is. And we came from this world of fear, and it's time to make that shift and to change it. And the thing is, if you're trying to protect something or someone, you're afraid for them. And what does that really translate into? If we really want to express love, it's about allowing, and it's about letting people be who they really are and accepting them for who they are. And, we're little, and it's, all these things that you should and shouldn't be, boys shouldn't cry and be a big girl and all this kind of stuff. And it's about hiding those feelings and those emotions, those pieces of who we are. And it's expressing it that really allows the freedom. And it's not about putting judgment on it. And I think there's been a lot of misconceptions and a lot of just confusion. And it's not right or wrong or bad or good. It's just confusion about what emotions really are and how we should feel them and express them. Because in expressing emotions, we set them free. We allow them out of ourselves. And if we don't express them, that's when we create these knots inside ourselves. And again, going back to the density and darkness, this energy gets clogged up. Being transparent, being clear, being free is about flowing and allowing ourselves to be seen. So a lot of this ties into emotion. So living in transparency for me is about not just, you hear the word transparency around things like business, being transparent in business and allowing people to know what you're doing behind the scenes and things like that. And that's very important. I really think transparency needs to come across in all aspects of the world. But just talking about ourselves, it's about allowing our emotions to be seen, allowing all sides of ourselves to be seen, and learning that it's okay to have each of these emotions and each of these feelings, because if something happens to us, let's say when we're little, because it's it's something we can all relate to, something happens, and right away, whether it's a parent, it's a friend, it's a relative, it's it's okay, don't cry, you're fine, you're okay, you don't have to be sad, and whichever feeling it is. If it's not a positive feeling, we immediately want to squash it. We want to put it down, and it's obviously nobody likes to see somebody be sad. Nobody likes to see somebody be angry. But if a child's sad about something, there's nothing wrong with allowing them to express that sadness, because it'll help them understand why they're having it, and it'll also help everyone else understand. And especially in terms of a parent, if the child learns to express why they're sad, then there's an understanding that the parent has of why the child is sad, and then they can work with that together and hopefully even stop it from happening again. But if that emotion doesn't come out, if it's not expressed, then there really isn't a true understanding there. There really isn't true flow there or communication there. And that child just learns these kind of emotions aren't good, they aren't wrong, I shouldn't express them, they stuff it down. So again, transparency is about letting that out, letting it be seen both in yourself and others. And the more vulnerable you can be with yourself, the more others see you, and it really is a huge gift. It really is, because it also allows others the safety to know that they can be vulnerable, and it gives them an actual feeling of safety that, like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to be me, and it's also okay. I see this person expressing who they really are, and being transparent about all the things in their life, even the things they don't like. And if they have the courage to be that, and it's okay, maybe I have the courage to be that, and it's also okay. And so transparency, for me, is, again, I really go back to the emotions and how important it is to express the emotions. And it's sneaky, it's subtle, because even us here, there's a lot of very open people here, a lot of spiritual people here, but when you really start to look at it and look at every conversation that you're having and how you interact with all different people, we're smart beings. We're good at hiding things. We're good at being subtle, and there are so many ways in which we don't allow certain things to surface, we don't allow certain things to express. And it doesn't have to be big. It can be little things. It can just be subtle little hints in there that you're afraid to admit something about yourself. You're afraid to express how you feel about someone. You're afraid to be, and again, it goes back towards, I don't want to call them negative emotions, but things like fear and guilt and shame. We're ashamed of how we look, maybe we're ashamed of our bodies, we're ashamed of how we act, we're ashamed of a certain trait that we have that we picked up along the way. And it's time to get over that. It's time to let it go. It's time to understand that it's not shame and guilt that's going to get us anywhere. And when we open up, if we allow that out, if you say, and what I've learned is it's surprising that the reaction that you get from other people when you can truly be vulnerable, because the fear is our fear. It's not their fear. It's coming from inside of us. If we can get over that and step past that little bit of fear that we have, it's amazing the miracles that open up for us. Because if you have to approach somebody, let's just say it's a coworker, for example, and there's some tension there and some issues, and it's easy to walk up and just keep that anxiety kind of going back and forth, and you play this little game of tennis going back and forth, But imagine if you walked up and you were like, hey, it really kind of bothers me and upsets me that we have this tension between us, and I don't really like it. And that's huge. It's a huge release of that energy and that tension, and that whole situation just shifts in that moment, just like that. And it's important to understand that you don't have to understand. Even if you don't know exactly why there's a tension there, that's okay. Start with just admitting every feeling that you have about the situation or about the person that's in this. So maybe you don't understand exactly why there is tension there, but admitting that there's tension, admitting that you have that feeling, it goes back to the feeling in the moment, and take it one step at a time. I feel uncomfortable. Okay, now you have something to work with. Now you can look at why it is. And it automatically diffuses the situation because it takes the other person off their guard, because there is such beauty and vulnerability. People want to help people. They really do. If you humbly come to anyone, whether it's someone you know or a stranger, and you're humbly asking for help, most of the time you will get it. And even if it's somebody that you have problems with, as soon as you open up that door of vulnerability to ask for help, and you let your guards down and you let your walls down, they do the same. It suddenly comes down, and suddenly they see that somebody is actually asking for help and wanting help. And it's a funny thing, we do funny things sometimes, because these little battles that we get into, it's almost like we have an automatic defense to ego, and especially like it's other people's ego. We have this battle of egos, As soon as someone else's wall goes up, then we want to put our wall up, and it almost becomes about who's stronger, and who's more stubborn, and who can put up the most fight, And it's time to shift to the other end of the spectrum and see what happens when who can be the most vulnerable, and who can be the most open, and who can be the most transparent. And it's amazing what a shift that will do in the world, in your lives, in your relationships, and in everyone around you, because they all see it, they all feel it. It's something that's actually tangible in a way, just it's something that we feel. And it's really beautiful when we start opening up to these new ways of living and being and allowing. And it always goes back to the feeling. And I'm learning this as I go. This is all a process for me. And I lived a lot of my life kind of hiding my feelings and stuffing them down a little bit. So it's been an interesting little challenge, and it feels like a very long journey I've taken to open up, a little more. And I'm finally in that place where I'm ready to just be completely clear, completely transparent, and completely open and see what happens, And it's a little bit of a risk. And here's the good news, is that as scary as it seems, if you're really being truthful about your emotions, and that's the real trick, is it's your emotions, because everyone else has their own views and opinions and feelings and reactions, and people might react. You might finally step up and be very vulnerable and open, and it's possible that you have a reaction from someone else instead of it being this loving exchange. But keep in mind, that's them. That's their reaction. It's them being afraid of your vulnerability, because for them it might mean, well, they might have to be vulnerable and open, and that might scare the hell out of them. Because it scares the hell out of me sometimes, And so it's just important too to be aware of that. That as long as you're being truthful with yourself, with your feelings, with your emotions, that's the first step, and take it one step at a time, because we're new at this. I'm new at this anyway. So I also need to remind myself to be gentle with myself as I'm stepping forward and as I'm letting myself be seen, as I'm letting my light shine. And that's really what this is about too. We all have our light inside of us, but if we're dense, if we're solid, the light inside us won't shine out. And people won't see who we really are, and won't see that beauty and that light that really is inside of us. And the same thing with them, the people that that aren't really allowing themselves to be clear and aren't really allowing themselves to be open, they're blocking their light from reaching us. And it goes both ways. When we become clear, when we become transparent, we allow our light out, and we allow the outside light in. And it goes both ways, and we start seeing things differently. And you start picking up on things. It's all perspective, and it's practice too. The more you allow yourself to be vulnerable, the more you start noticing when other people are also vulnerable. It goes both ways. It always goes both ways. And I don't know, how are we on time?
Open up for questions and comments pretty quick.
Oh. Okay. So it's funny. It's funny too, because when I stopped making notes when I do talks. I did it, I think, the first time, and I think it actually caused more of a pause and more of a distraction for me trying to remember my notes. So now what I usually do is when a thought or when a topic comes to me, just in my meditations, I always see myself just like the flow of the conversation just comes out, things to talk about come out. And so this is me being a little transparent, though. It never quite works out. My little silent talk in my head always goes so much better and so much clearer. One of these days, I'm waiting, when we can just record, our images, and then, then I can just be like, okay, this is the talk, and I'll just play it for you, and then I'll come up with questions, But again, it's practice, and I believe that the more I get up here and the more I speak, the less nervous I get about it. And on the way here, I was feeling great, and then I sit down. And she's introducing me, and the nerves start going. The nerves start going. But it's okay. And again, it's about honoring the feelings. It's okay that I felt nervous to stand up here and talk to you. But what are my choices? To not talk, or to just be like, okay, I'm nervous. It'll be okay, and I give it my best shot. And that's all we can ever do. Recently, I actually opened up some feelings about somebody, and expressed some feelings that I had. And it wasn't even on. It was very pure feelings. You know, it wasn't about trying to get a date or anything like that. It was just, and it wasn't. And when it is, I'm happy to tell them that. They know. You know, but it was really just about some pure feelings that I had with somebody that I really liked, and just shared that, and it backfired a little bit. You know, and it goes back to that. You know, I think that the other person, maybe they're just afraid of being open and being vulnerable, and I could have taken that situation and just shut back down and been like, you know what, this transparency and this vulnerability, it sucks. You know, I could have just easily chosen to go there and be like, forget it, I'm keeping my mouth shut. But I know for me, I did the best that I could, and I did what was right for me, because keeping that inside was creating more of a blockage and more turmoil than anything that'll happen now. And that's the most important thing. So any emotions that come up, please, and start practicing. Start practicing. Learn to express it. Learn to put it out. As simple as, you know, hey, I'm feeling a little nervous right now. You know, I'm feeling a little nervous and a little scared about having this conversation with you. And it can be that simple. And starting a talk that way just releases so much beauty and energy around it. It's that simple. It's that simple. Just be transparent with every little emotion you have. Be transparent with who you really are. Allow all those sides of yourself to be seen, and admit that they're there. Don't be afraid of them. Don't be ashamed of them. Just know that it's part of who you were, and because you're seeing it, it's part of who you are now. It doesn't have to stay part of who you're becoming. And that part is the choice. Because as long as we hide it, it's always there. It's always part of us. When we set it free, we now have the choice and the space to move into being something else. Thank you.
I would like to really thank you for your honesty and just putting yourself out there, and you're not trying to sell us anything about how great you are and your big ego.
That comes later.
Thank you, because it's really very refreshing, because we all are vulnerable. So thank you for being the one that take it for the team.
Yeah. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And you know what's funny too is what's funny too is one of my traits that I've had my whole life is being very stubborn, and my family will attest to that very well. But what I've learned is, well, partially to let that go a little bit, you know, and be a little more easygoing. But I've also learned that some of the traits that I've had have a positive side to it, because I can be stubborn about not caring whether this is going to go well, and just being, you know, me, and like, you know what, I'm just going to come up here and talk, and it's just going to come out however it is. And some of the other things that I'm doing, like I'm starting to do other events and things like that, and it's about, you know what, I'm just going to do it because I feel this is right, and I'm not going to care about, you know, what other people say and what other people think, and whether they think the day is right or the time is right, and all that kind of stuff, because there's always going to be excuses, there's always going to be reasons not to. For me, as long as I have even one good reason to do, it is worth it. Yes.
I remember reading about, you know, in ancient times, I guess when language was maybe starting to develop, and people were naturally more telepathic, and there was more mental communication between everybody.
Yeah.
And when that was happening, it was absolutely impossible to lie to one another.
Yeah.
Because we could perceive it, we knew what the inner dialogue was. And I always thought that was very fascinating.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we're kind of maybe evolving back into that state where we're more attuned to one another and going to be eventually less capable of doing that.
Yeah, I absolutely believe it. I absolutely believe it. And I mean, really, we're all intuitive beings. Every human being on the planet, whether they admit it or not, you know, everyone understands the gut feeling, you know. And you talk about women's intuition and things like that. So if we really pay attention, and you know, we don't have to meditate for hours on end and try to connect with our guides and things like that. I mean, just really pay attention, and we know people. We can sense people, and we can tell when somebody's nervous, you know, or not really being open or honest and all that kind of stuff. But I absolutely believe that as a species, we're evolving back to that era where there is so much openness that and so much intuition and so much of an energetic connection that you can just meet somebody and there's a full exchange of each other's beings, and you probably don't even need to think about what you want to do next. Is you both just kind of know, and it happens sometimes. We've all been there. We meet people, like a lot of us are meeting members of our soul families, and there's certain people you meet, and you just automatic have that connection with them, and you feel comfortable around them, and feel you've known them your whole life, and you just feel like you know them. And I think that we will get to the point as a species where we're capable of having that interaction with every single human being that we come in contact with. And that's part of what. See, now I'm gonna do little self, but it's still not. But it's not because it's really not for me. I don't want to do. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that either. I am starting a nonprofit called Awaken, and it's this idea of I have this vision of us getting back to this world where it's just complete transparency, complete openness. It's a world of truth, and it's a world of feeling and intuition, and knowing each other and connecting with each other and just living in peace and harmony. And I think it's very easy to get there if we do it consciously and we do it together, because there's enough people already on this planet right now in this lifetime that are on the right path and can help the rest of us stay on that path or get on that path, and we can all evolve together as a species. That's part of what this organization that I'm working on creating is for. And it's funny too, because I would love to say that I'm completely selfless and that this is for everyone, but I'm part of all this. So that's also a lie, and it'd be silly to not do something for myself, because a lot of this is also about loving ourselves and seeing ourselves as worthy. So everything that we do, it goes both ways. And again, it goes back to that crystal. So like even as individual people, we're still really just different sides of the same whole. We're still in this together. Everything I do for me, I do for you. Everything I do for you, I do for me. And it works in harmony. Edie.
And, two things that you said jumped out at me, and I don't know whether you said this or I just heard it. Something about their safety and being seen. I don't know if you use those words.
Yeah.
That it's safer to be seen than it is to hide. And when you think about all the times and the ways that people come out, whether it's relationships, whether it's this is my passion, this is what I want to do, people already know that about you. Like when somebody says, they decide that they're gay, the parents say, I already knew that.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
I'm an artist, yeah, I already knew that about you. So why do we bother hiding? What I'm wondering for you, what has kept you at times from crossing over that line and saying, okay, stripping off all the layers, come out, wherever you are, here's who I am. What gets in your way sometimes?
Fear. It's just, and a lot of it is about judgment, and it's interesting, the reflections that we have, because I can be very critical and judgmental of other people. So because of that, I know, and it's funny too, because but we see what we want to see. I also believe that we see what we see clearly, meaning we see in others most clear what we see in ourselves most clear. And look how nicely that ties in, because if we only are focusing on certain aspects of ourselves, we have a tendency of only seeing those aspects in others. So because I'm very good at being critical and judgmental, I see others being critical and judgmental of me, and that has been my biggest adversary with really like stepping into this spiritual life and living it fully, because I'm always afraid of what other people might say, and what they might think of me. And it's interesting because, and again, this all ties in, because what I have noticed very much so is, and it's also just being secure with it, because people aren't stupid. Like, they sense things, they see things. If I'm nervous and unsure about being a spiritual being and believing what I believe, if I'm unsure of that, then other people are going to be unsure of me, and it creates this fear cycle, but it's completely fair, because if I'm not being secure in myself, why should I expect someone else to stand up for something that I'm barely standing up for in myself, So it all ties in together, and thank you for that though, Edie, because that's what I've been working on getting over, is getting past that fear. And what I've found is the more I open up about, this is my new life, this is how I want to live, this is what I believe in, instead of getting, criticism and judgment, things like that, it's opening this huge door, and people are starting to come up to me and be like, oh, well, you know about this stuff. Oh, you know about angels, don't you? Like, oh, you know about like eating healthy and things like that. And they're actually coming to me because there's a lot of things, even if people aren't stepping fully into this newer way of living, and spirituality and things like that, there's a lot of people out there that are open to things, and it's the same kind of fear. they're barely on the cusp of any of this stuff, so they're not going to open up these kind of conversations. But if they know that it's something you're comfortable talking about, then it's safe for them to come to you to ask questions. So the more we can be transparent, especially us that are, in this new spiritual life, that are on this new cusp of evolution, that are stepping into this new world of this higher level of being and living, and what I consider being closer to how God created us and really wanted us to live. As we get closer to that, the more we can be open about our beliefs and about our experiences and about the other experiences that others we know have had, the more it opens up that door for everyone else around us, and that just spreads out. Other questions?
Well, I wasn't so much a question as I wanted to thank you for being so open and so clear, also for bringing the idea that there is balance in it, that it doesn't always work out the way we think it will, but it is as it is, and it's good regardless of how it works out, but to have the courage to do that. I just want to thank you for bringing all those points up.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Yes.
And I think the irony is when you think you're being vulnerable, other people see you as being strong.
Right. Yeah. It's true. It's true. Strength and vulnerability. Okay.
You said something that really hit a nerve with me. Because a lot of your talk has been about, I think you've also alluded to be within, but it's more about interactions with others. But I think this idea, and I feel this in a lot of talks, the principle actually applies very much to one's own self, about being transparent to oneself. So, for instance, when you said I'm critical and judgmental, I know that that's one of my biggest issues, is being critical and judgmental. And then I thought to myself, well, given what you're saying, like, what if I, number one, allowed myself to be said, okay, I'm critical and judgmental, rather than getting angry at myself, wanting to push that away, feeling shame about it, what if I said, okay, well, I'm critical and judgmental. What's that about? And sit with it a while and allow myself to be, okay, I've got this part. There's a reason for it. So if I can sit with it for a while, go a little bit deeper into it, say, well, what's behind it? Why am I critical and judgmental? What's going on? Why do I feel the need to be combative?
Yeah.
Why do I feel the need to do that? And then all of a sudden, in being transparent and honest with myself, there's an opportunity to go a layer deeper and say, well, there's a wound there. It hasn't fully healed. And so this need, like the Course in Miracles says, that everything's either an expression of love or a cry for love. So maybe where's the cry for love?
Right.
And so then if I can be more honest and transparent with myself, I can get more clear as to what's going on with me, and therefore I can be more transparent with others because I can start to perhaps heal more.
Right.
What's going on inside of me. So I think it's not only outside, but it's transparent inside as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it goes both ways. Everything flows both ways, and it's very important to keep in mind, and it's a lesson I've been learning too, is these sides of ourselves, especially the ones that we don't like so much. We weren't born with them. We weren't born guilty and shameful and depressed. Like, we weren't born with this. It's not really who we are. They're just things that we've picked up along the way. And unless we face them and bring them to the light and allow them to be seen, we're not really going to release them, and we're not really going to transform them. How would you do that?
Good. I spent a week with my husband in a car, and that was very transparent. Yeah, transparent. It was the week of our 8th year anniversary. We've known each other for 9.5 years. And this time I consciously decided to vlog everything that we said and did. So it was really eye-opening because I realized, because of different conversations we had, we went to a totally different town or a different attraction we went down south to Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama, places we thought were very different from home and we had never been. So it was really neat. So the first day we went to the Marriott and sort of recouped after flying and everything. Very nice place to stay with a pool and and the rest of the trip was couch surfing, where you invite yourself in people's houses. And it's very interesting to hear the stories of what you tell other people, what your relationship is like, and what you're all about, what you do for a career. So it was a lot of transparency, and it was interesting how our story shifted from one couch trip to another. So this is very apropos.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to say, I was just so happy to hear your specific example about when you were open with somebody and selling them something and they didn't exactly reciprocate. And, you know,
Yeah. And you know, and I really didn't even want to say that, but I'm like, you know, how can I do a talk on transparency and not, you know, mention something
well,
like
that's
that?
like the best thing that you said. Because it reminded me of it was a couple of years ago that I had an experience like that. And I was so disappointed because I was feeling like this was with somebody who was supposed to be all open. So it was like, oh, well, you know, that didn't work.
Yeah.
And what I didn't really analyze it, but as soon as you said it, you told your story, it made me feel like, oh, what I felt when that happened was alone. Like, I'm the only one that this has ever happened to. Not that I would really think that, but that was what it felt like.
Yeah.
So it made me feel like you're sharing that was an example of what's so important about coming together and talking about this. It's just knowing that other people have those same disappointments and, you know, when you're trying to be vulnerable and it's not really working.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm not the only one. It just makes you feel better. Because it's not always going to be successful.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly not always easy, and it certainly doesn't always come out the way that you hoped it would, you know. But, and this is a little lesson in being present, because how often when we, like, so feelings come up, you know, and there may be some anxiety or just whatever the feelings are, you know, they come up around a situation and we know they're there, and again, if we hold them in, it's just worse. It really is worse. And the problem is that we start projecting into the future and we start trying to figure out what's going to happen later, depending on how we express ourselves now. And I'm good at analyzing, so I see, you know, a million possibilities of how this could go wrong. And I probably only see like 3 ways it can go right. But I'm working on shifting that too, you know, because again, but that is a mindset of how we were raised. We were raised in a very negative world, looking at things that could go bad, looking at things that could go wrong. You know, I mentioned that earlier too. And it's about us consciously making that choice of, you know what, if even this can go right one way, let me focus on that. And actually, that doesn't even matter, because until you do it, you're not going to know how it's going to turn out. So in the moment, do what's best for you, and I promise you that sharing your feeling is going to be better for you, and if you learn to share well, I don't want to say right, you know, just if you learn to share well, it is received well. Yes.
And not being attached, you did mention to whether it's received well or not.
Yeah.
You know, as a healer and working with people and being open and honest and transparent as I can be, and just sometimes, you know, we have a tendency to not say the truth because we're afraid of how someone will react.
Yeah.
So as a healer, it's been very important to me to let that go. And if they choose not to come back because they don't like what I said, then that's fine. And it's been very interesting over the years, and sometimes it takes time. But almost all of those people have eventually come back and remembered and commented and thanked me for whatever it was that might have occurred or been said. And it, you know, again, sometimes it took time that they sat with it. I think of one person, it was like 2 years. But it's really pretty amazing that you've planted a seed that's opened something up in them, and allowed them to come to terms with it and examine it. And eventually there's usually a shift.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not right in the moment.
Right.
And then and to be okay with that, whatever the other person's reaction, that's not about me, it's about them.
Right.
And so that was really a big thing for me to work with, because, you know, we didn't, you know, I grew up in the house where you didn't tell the neighbors, you know, how much,
Right.
what was going on at home, or how much money anybody had, or all this stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and let me just touch again and emphasize. So the idea of reaction, if someone else reacts, it's their reaction. It is theirs. However, what I have learned is if someone else is reacting, yes, I know it's their reaction, yes, I know it's their stuff, but that's not a good enough excuse for me. If they're reacting, there's something I could have done differently. There's a better way I could have expressed myself. And because if they're getting defensive, then how I express myself wasn't quite as open and loving and honest as I really could have been. That is also what I'm learning very clearly.
Or
Hold on, yeah.
There's a cultural thing going on. My son married somebody from another culture, and we learned in our home with our children, my husband and I, to share feelings. This person in their culture did not.
Right.
And what has happened, I've known, she's my daughter-in-law, and I've known her now over 15 years. And last time visiting, I mentioned something to her, and it really shut her down because I was being expressive. Now, the first thing I wanted to do was be defensive with myself, but I'm sitting in the Course in Miracles, knowing that she's innocent, and this is cultural.
Yeah.
And first I felt hurt, and then after sitting in this Course in Miracles, I am learning something else, not to be tied to the outcome, to love her unconditionally and see her innocence. And that frees me, but I think it's also going to free her. But more importantly, I came to some kind of compassion because this was her childhood. And I can't expect everybody to be like we raised our children. But she has my firstborn son, and he is the most loving. He can live in that kind of environment and be in that relationship where she's very closed and he's open. But there's a healing process there going on. And it's beautiful. And I have to step back and just accept and love. And it's beautiful. But I can't expect everybody to be like myself.
Right.
And that in itself gives me a certain compassion for her. And I love her dearly.
Yeah.
And I call her and I share her and I talk with her still. But I know there's something that happened between us in that incident that pushed her further away for now. But I'm going to allow it to be.
Right. Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful. Yeah, and for me, I want to start holding myself to higher standards. So, you can't you can't expect everyone to be like you. But if you're making this choice, I want to stop saying but. I've been trying, as a side note, I've been trying to replace the word but with and. Because but is separating and is unifying. And I'm trying to hold myself, so yeah, I can't expect everyone to be open and vulnerable all the time, but I can make that choice and expect myself to be open and vulnerable, and that lets them know that I can be open and vulnerable, and they can start expecting that of me.
I grew from that experience.
Yeah.
I became more open.
Wonderful. Ken.
that's a beautiful segue. I just want to bring in the multidimensional perspective, a teeny bit, which is, and Betsy would be very much into this, I think, that whenever we run into someone who's not receptive, or whoever one is receptive, there is a piece that's reflecting back to us what's going on inside of us.
Yeah.
And when you said what you said about the culture, I got this feeling of an interdimensional facet of humanity. And that something was playing out that was reflecting something was going on within all of us because we're all one.
Yeah.
So the fact that there was a kind of emergence or potential emergence of the interplay between the cultures is reflective of something at a higher meta level of something that we're all dealing with. So it's not only in them, but it's in me too. It's in all of us. And you made the statement that you're learning to open up more too. So therefore, some of her reticence maybe was also in you, but you weren't recognizing the place where it was hidden way back here, and also it's showing up in this person. And that's kind of the Baron Katie work as well. You turn it around and say, like, okay, where's that piece in me?
Right. Yeah. So everyone, remember to be transparent. Remember to be open.
Thank you.